30 countries are lining up to join a bloc that could end America's economic reign. You've probably never heard of it. But what's happening behind closed doors right now could change everything about how money, trade, and power move around the world. This is the story of BRICS, and why it's about to get a whole lot bigger. They're not making headlines every day. They're not issuing threats or waging wars. But make no mistake, they are reshaping the global order, one strategic decision at a time. BRICS isn't just observing the shift in power, it's orchestrating it. What started as a modest gathering of 5 nations in 2009 has evolved into something far more significant. Today, this bloc represents over 40% of the world's population and more than a quarter of global GDP. And it's preparing for its most decisive expansion yet. More than 30 nations have expressed serious interest. Over 20 have formally submitted applications. And the question on everyone's mind isn't if BRICS will grow, it's who gets in next and what that means for the rest of us. Because this isn't just about adding members to a club, it's about building a parallel system, one that doesn't rely on the US dollar, one that doesn't bow to Western institutions, and one that's gaining traction faster than most people realize. Let's rewind for a moment. BRICS was born in 2009 during the aftermath of the global financial crisis. 5 countries came together: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Their goal was simple but bold: challenge the dominance of Western-led institutions like the G7, the IMF, and the World Bank. At the time, critics dismissed it as a symbolic gesture, a feel-good forum with no real teeth. But they underestimated the quiet determination behind it. Fast forward to 2024. BRICS expanded dramatically, welcoming Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and Indonesia into its fold. That brought the total to 10 full members, a coalition now spanning 4 continents, controlling critical energy supplies, and representing billions of people. And the expansion didn't stop there. The interest kept growing. The applications kept coming. Because for many nations, BRICS offers something the West no longer does: options. Here's what's driving this wave of interest. For decades, the global financial system has been dominated by institutions created in the wake of World War II. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, systems designed by the victors for the victors. And while these institutions have played a role in global development, they've also been criticized heavily for imposing conditions that many countries see as intrusive, unfair, or even exploitative. Loans that come with strings attached. Structural adjustment programs that force governments to cut public spending. Development aid that feels more like leverage than partnership. For nations across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, the frustration has been building for years. And now they're looking for something different. BRICS offers that alternative. It promises cooperation without coercion, trade without political meddling. Financing that doesn't trap you in cycles of debt or force you to surrender sovereignty. This isn't just a shift in alliances. It's a philosophical break from the past. Countries are tired of being lectured, tired of being sanctioned, tired of watching their economies get punished for decisions made thousands of miles away in boardrooms they'll never enter. BRICS says there's another way, and more nations are listening. Who's knocking on the door? So, who exactly is interested in joining? Well, the list is long, and honestly, it's pretty strategic. In the Gulf, you have Bahrain and Kuwait, small in size but enormous in energy wealth. These nations have, traditionally leaned toward Western partnerships, but they're now pivoting eastward. With Iran and the UAE already inside BRICS, adding Bahrain and Kuwait would give the bloc unprecedented influence over global oil markets. Imagine a scenario where BRICS nations control not just production, but pricing, supply routes, and energy policy coordination. That's not hypothetical anymore. It's becoming a genuine possibility. Then there's Mexico. Yes, Mexico, a $1.5 trillion economy sitting right on America's southern border. If Mexico joins BRICS, it would be a seismic shift, bringing the bloc directly into North America and, well, challenging decades of assumed U.S. economic dominance in the region. Mexico offers critical ports, direct trade access to both the Pacific and Atlantic, and a massive consumer base. More importantly, it sends a signal. Even neighbors can choose a different path. In Eastern Europe, Belarus offers strategic value. Sandwiched between Russia and the European Union, it serves as a potential gateway into a continent that has long been firmly in the Western camp. As tensions between Russia and NATO remain high, Belarus becomes even more critical. Its inclusion would give BRICS a foothold in Europe, not through invasion or intimidation, but through economics and diplomacy. A quiet expansion into territory that was once considered untouchable. Southeast Asia is also in play. Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam are manufacturing powerhouses. They produce electronics, automobiles, semiconductors, and consumer goods at scale. Vietnam's export growth has been explosive. Malaysia is a key player in global chip production. Thailand is investing heavily in green energy and tech infrastructure. These aren't struggling economies looking for a lifeline. These are rising powers looking for a platform that reflects their ambitions. Vietnam, in particular, has positioned itself brilliantly. It has deep trade ties with the United States, but it's also increasingly aligned with China and other Asian powers. Joining BRICS wouldn't mean cutting ties with the West. It would mean diversifying options. And in today's world, diversification is survival. In Central Asia, Uzbekistan sits at the crossroads of China, Russia, South Asia, and the Middle East. It controls vital trade routes and has rich natural resources. Its inclusion would further connect BRICS into a single, integrated economic corridor. Uzbekistan is already a key partner in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Adding it to BRICS would deepen that integration and create a seamless network linking Europe to Asia, bypassing traditional Western-controlled routes entirely. And then there's Sri Lanka. Despite its recent economic turmoil, the island nation occupies one of the most strategically important positions on Earth, right along the Indian Ocean's busiest shipping lanes. Control over Sri Lanka could mean influence over a significant portion of global maritime trade. China has already invested heavily in Sri Lankan ports. India watches closely, given its proximity and security concerns. But if Sri Lanka joins BRICS, it could transform from a struggling debtor nation into a strategic linchpin in a much larger system. Each of these countries brings something unique to the table. But what unites them is this: they all see BRICS as a way to gain more control over their own futures. The financial engine. Now, let's talk about the machinery behind this movement. At the heart of BRICS is the New Development Bank, or NDB. Established in 2014, it was designed to be an alternative to the World Bank and IMF, institutions that many developing nations view with deep skepticism. The NDB does something revolutionary. It offers financing in local currencies, not just the US dollar. That might sound technical, but honestly, it's a game changer. When countries borrow in dollars, they become vulnerable to currency fluctuations, inflation in the US, and the whims of American monetary policy. But when they borrow in yuan, rupees, or rands, they retain more control. They reduce their exposure to external shocks. They protect their reserves. And the model is working. Nearly half of all trade within BRICS is now settled in Chinese yuan. That's not a coincidence. It's a deliberate strategy to reduce dependence on the dollar and build a parallel financial ecosystem. For decades, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency. That status gave Washington immense power. The ability to print money that others needed, to control access to global markets, to enforce sanctions that cut entire nations off from the financial system. But BRICS is chipping away at that foundation, slowly, methodically. And with each passing year, the dollar's dominance looks a little less permanent. But BRICS isn't stopping there. Discussions are underway to develop a shared digital settlement system, potentially blockchain-based, secure, and completely independent of Western infrastructure like SWIFT. If that happens, BRICS won't just be an alternative, it will be a rival. Imagine a world where transactions between India and Brazil or China and South Africa happen instantly, without touching a single Western bank. No clearinghouses in New York, no oversight from London, no SWIFT codes. Just direct peer-to-peer transfers that bypass the entire existing system. That's the vision, and it's closer than many people think. The geopolitical chessboard. This isn't just about economics, it's about power. For decades, the United States has used the dollar as a tool of influence. Sanctions, trade restrictions, access to global markets, all of it flows through systems that Washington controls. But BRICS is building a world where that control doesn't matter as much. Take the war in Ukraine, for example. Western sanctions hit Russia hard. Assets were frozen. Companies pulled out. Access to SWIFT was cut. It was supposed to cripple the Russian economy. But something unexpected happened. Russia turned to China, India, and other BRICS members for trade. Energy exports continued. Payments were rerouted. Life went on. That sent a message to other countries. There are workarounds. You don't have to play by the old rules if you don't want to. And that message is resonating. Countries that have felt bullied, sidelined, or squeezed by Western institutions are now exploring their options. BRICS offers them a seat at a different table, one where they're treated as equals, not dependents. It's not about ideology, it's about autonomy. Nations want the freedom to make their own decisions without being punished for it. They want trade relationships that don't come with lectures. They want financing that doesn't force them to privatize public services or cut social spending. BRICS offers that. And in a world where sovereignty feels increasingly fragile, that's a powerful proposition. And then, Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025. One of his first major moves? A sweeping new wave of tariffs. 50% on Chinese electric vehicles, 25% on semiconductors, 40% on steel and aluminum, 30% on select pharmaceuticals from India and Brazil. The message was clear. America first, round two. But the reaction wasn't what Washington expected. India called the tariffs short-sighted. China labeled them economic aggression. South Africa publicly rejected what it called outdated rules. Even longtime U.S. partners like Mexico, Thailand, and Malaysia began quietly reevaluating their options. Because here's the thing, tariffs don't just raise costs, they erode trust, they signal unpredictability. And for countries trying to plan long-term strategies, unpredictability is a deal-breaker. Trump frames it differently, of course. At press events, he's highlighted new agreements with Europe and Japan. He's called Indonesia critically important. He's talked about massive capital flowing back into the United States. To him, tariffs are leverage, tools of negotiation, ways to extract better deals. But the numbers tell a different story. While Trump sees tariffs as leverage, much of the world sees them as proof that the U.S. can't be relied upon. And that's pushing nations toward alternatives. In a strange twist, Trump's aggressive trade policies may be accelerating the very shift they were meant to prevent. Pressure creates exits, and right now, BRICS is that exit. Countries that were on the fence are now leaning in. Nations that were quietly exploring membership are now openly advocating for it. Because if the United States is going to treat trade as a weapon, then having an alternative system isn't just smart, it's necessary. So let's imagine the next phase actually happens. Bahrain, Malaysia, Turkey, Vietnam, Belarus, Sri Lanka, Mexico, Kuwait, Thailand, Uzbekistan all join BRICS in the coming years. What would that look like? You'd have a bloc stretching across Asia, Europe, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. A coalition representing more than half the world's population. An economic force rivaling, or even surpassing, the G7. You'd have control over vast energy resources, critical shipping lanes, and major manufacturing hubs. You'd have access to trillions of dollars in consumer markets and infrastructure projects. And you'd have a unified voice pushing for a multipolar world, one where power isn't concentrated in Washington, Brussels, or London, but distributed across capitals like Beijing, New Delhi, Brasilia, and Riyadh. This wouldn't just be a new alliance. It would be a new architecture for global governance. The G7 would still exist. NATO would still exist. The IMF and World Bank would still operate. But they'd no longer be the only game in town. They'd have competition, real competition. And competition, as any economist will tell you, tends to drive better outcomes. It forces systems to improve. It gives participants leverage. It creates options where none existed before. For smaller nations, this could be transformative. Instead of choosing between alignment with Washington or Beijing, they could play both sides. They could negotiate better terms. They could pursue their own interests without fear of being cut off. Of course, it's not all smooth sailing. BRICS faces serious internal challenges. China and India have border disputes that occasionally flare into violence. Russia and Brazil have vastly different political systems, one authoritarian, one democratic. South Africa and the UAE operate in completely different economic contexts. There's no shared ideology here, no common culture, no single vision of what the future should look like. What holds BRICS together isn't unity of belief, it's unity of interest. A shared desire to rewrite the rules, a common frustration with the status quo, and a pragmatic recognition that together they're stronger. But that also makes BRICS fragile. If trust breaks down, if conflicts escalate, if national interests diverge too sharply, the whole thing could unravel. Can China and India set aside their rivalry long enough to build something lasting? Can Russia maintain its influence without alienating other members? Can smaller nations trust that they won't just be dominated by Beijing instead of Washington? These are real questions, and they don't have easy answers. But here's what's worth noting. Despite these challenges, BRICS keeps growing. Applications keep coming in. Trade keeps increasing. The new development bank keeps issuing loans. The system keeps functioning. That suggests something important. Whatever the internal tensions, there's enough shared interest to keep the project alive. And as long as that remains true, BRICS will continue to expand. Step back for a moment and look at what's really happening here. This isn't just about trade deals or currency swaps. It's about the end of an era. For the past 80 years, the global order has been shaped by institutions created in the aftermath of World War II. The United Nations, the Bretton Woods system, NATO, the G7. These weren't neutral systems. They were designed by the winners of that war to serve their interests. And for decades they worked, at least for those at the top. But the world has changed. Power has shifted. New economies have risen. Old assumptions no longer hold. China is now the world's second largest economy, and by some measures, the largest. India is on track to become the third. Brazil, Indonesia, and other emerging markets are growing faster than most developed nations. Yet the old institutions still reflect a world where the United States and Europe called all the shots, where decisions were made in Washington and Brussels, and everyone else was expected to comply. That model is breaking down, not because of war or revolution, but because it no longer matches reality. And BRICS represents the clearest challenge yet to that post-war order. It's not asking for a seat at the existing table. It's building a new table altogether. So where does this leave us? The next BRICS summit will be watched closely, not just by economists and diplomats, but by anyone paying attention to where the world is headed. Because the decisions made there will shape trade, finance, energy, and geopolitics for decades to come. For countries on the sidelines, those still deciding whether to join, the calculation is complex. Does BRICS offer genuine opportunity, or does it bring new risks? Does alignment mean freedom, or just a different kind of dependence? Mexico, for instance, has to weigh its deep economic ties with the United States against the potential benefits of joining a bloc that represents half the world's population. Vietnam has to consider whether BRICS membership strengthens its hand or makes it a target. For the United States and its allies, the challenge is equally real. Can they adapt to a world where their dominance is no longer guaranteed? Can they offer something more compelling than what BRICS promises? Because lecturing nations about democracy and human rights while simultaneously imposing sanctions and tariffs isn't working anymore. Countries want partnerships, not patronage. They want respect, not condescension. If the West can't provide that, BRICS will. And for the rest of us, citizens, observers, participants in this global system, the question is simpler but no less important. Are we witnessing the birth of a fairer, more balanced world order? Or are we watching old powers fall and new ones rise only to repeat the same mistakes? The truth is, we don't know yet. This story is still being written, but one thing is certain: the world is changing. And BRICS is at the center of that change. Whether you see this as progress or peril depends largely on where you sit. If you're in Washington, BRICS looks like a threat. If you're in New Delhi or Brasilia, it looks like opportunity. If you're in a developing nation tired of conditional aid and structural adjustment, it looks like hope. What's undeniable is this: the unipolar moment is over. The era where one country, one currency, one system dominated everything, that's coming to an end. What replaces it is still uncertain. It could be a multipolar world where power is more evenly distributed, where smaller nations have more agency, where cooperation replaces coercion, or it could be a fragmented world divided into competing blocs, where cold wars turn hot and economic rivalry spills into conflict. The next few years will tell us which path we're on. So what do you think? Should countries like Mexico or Vietnam take the leap and join? Does BRICS represent the future, or just another power play dressed up in new language? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going, because this isn't just a story about economics or politics. It's a story about the kind of world we're going to live in. And if you want to stay ahead of the shifts reshaping our world, one alliance, one decision, one turning point at a time, hit that subscribe button, because this is just the beginning. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.